understand it, please save yourself the trouble of leaving a comment asking why I am whispering. You can Google ASMR and get all the information that you need. Okay, so today I am going to be discussing Jessyka Nelson, and Jessyka was 28 years old when she was first reported missing. Jessyka was born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska, to her parents, Harry and Melissa Nelson. Throughout the entirety of this video, I'm going to be referring to Melissa Nelson as Missy because that's what everybody called her. Remember, she is Jessica's mother. So Jessyka was the oldest of 3 siblings. She had a younger sister, Ashley, and she had a younger brother, Matthew. And their family was incredibly close. When you hear somebody talk about a close family in the traditional sense, you do hear that quite a bit. However, Jessyka's family was just on another level. They were incredibly close and spent time with another all of the time. So they had these days that they would call Family Day to get all together. They also created these family fun nights. Their birthday dinners were always fun with golf outings and celebrations in the pool. They also traveled together quite a bit as well, and just overall a very loving and close family. Now, according to Jessica's younger sister Ashley, Jessyka was really smart and outgoing, and she just wanted to have fun. When I went to her Facebook, Jessica's Facebook is public, and when I checked that out, I got this sense that Jessyka was somebody who really was super kind to everybody and maybe just did not take things too personally, or she wasn't somebody that was into drama or, anything like that. She was incredibly kind, and she seemed to bring people together. She seemed to be somebody who galvanized people, and that's the sense that I got from her, plus so much more. But as I was saying, Jessica's sister Ashley talking about how smart and outgoing Jessyka was, and as all of them got older, Jessyka became more like a second mother to Ashley and Matthew, and she was always there for them no matter what. She was the big sister to the entire extended family, and she treated her friends like family, and she cared about people so much that she even treated her brother and sister's friends as part of the family. Now, of course, I did not know Jessyka personally, but as I just said, I did check out her Facebook, and I did find bits and bobs of information about her from her Facebook. It's there where I witnessed just what a devoted and responsible mother Jessyka was. To say that Jessyka lived for her son Dominic, who she called Dom, it's a huge understatement. Her son is in just about every post and photo she made. Jessyka loved and listened to music such as Fleetwood Mac, Casey mass graves and sick puppies. She liked movies such as Thor 2, and she watched TV shows such as Supernatural, Sons of Anarchy, and American Horror Story. She also loved photography, and she had hoped to start up her own photography business someday, and she was in a bowling league. So here's what Jessyka's About Me section says on Facebook. She says, "I love life. My son is absolutely amazing, and I cannot begin to imagine my life without him. I'm overwhelmingly optimistic, even when it's just naive of me to be. I always look for the best in everyone and tend to ignore the worst, even when it hurts me. I'm a camera whore and a music junkie. I'm completely random and inappropriate, and I love it." So that was her About Me section. Now, before Jessyka had her son Dominic, she was living with her boyfriend. His name is John McDowell, and their relationship was one of those on-again, off-again relationships. And though they did have some really wonderful times together, there are also some challenges. According to Jessyka's sister Ashley and her mom would get a call from Jessyka as often as every other week to come get Jessyka because she and John had another fight, and she did not want to stay there with John. But then after that would happen, just a couple of weeks would go by and Jessyka would be back living with John again. After about a year had gone by with Jessyka and John's relationship, Jessyka got pregnant with Dominic. Things in the relationship seemed to be going really well. That is, until one day Jessyka hears a voicemail that was sent from John. But that voicemail actually was not intended for Jessyka at all. John had accidentally left the message on Jessica's voicemail when he intended to leave it to a friend of his. And in this voicemail, John was bragging about sleeping with another girl. He was saying, like, "Oh my god, you had to see this girl," kind of thing, you know, being very braggadocious about it. And so that same night after Jessyka heard that message, Jessyka called her mother, Missy, and Missy went over there and helped Jessyka to move out and back in with her parents. Jessyka decided she wanted to be a single mother, and she gave it everything she had. As I said, she was a wonderful mother, and her entire world was Dominic. Living with her parents again, despite having a loving and strong bond with her family, Jessyka was determined to get a place of her own with Dominic. She strove for independence, and she was likely just wanting what most of us want, especially having a child to care and provide for. I would imagine that she just wanted to be out on her own. She worked really hard in order to be able to provide for and raise her son, and how she did that was by working as much as she could. She even at one point worked 3 jobs. She worked at a children's retail chain called The Children's Place. She took a job at a sports pub and she worked at Family Dollar. But she also had a job at Best Buy at some point, as well as a customer solution specialist. However, Jessyka really wanted to find a job where she could work full-time and have more of a consistent schedule, something more conducive to having most weekends off in order to spend time with her son and just have more of a regular 9 to 5. And she eventually found that when she landed a full-time job in collections and administrative recovery at First National Bank. Jessyka was so excited and so happy when she was hired at the bank, and though she wanted to only have the one job, she decided to work part-time as well as the full-time job, and so she kept the job at the children's clothing store. Finally, Jessyka was able to make more money, and not too long afterwards, she found a rental home that she could afford if she continued working hard. This was really a defining time in Jessyka's life. All of her hard work was paying off, and at 28 years old, with her 6-year-old son, Dominic, she was finally able to be out on her own, and she was really happy about that. That is until about 9 months after she moved to her new home. The date was June 25th, 2015. Jessyka was 28 years old and she was scheduled to work at her job at First National Bank that day. Jessyka was always punctual and very responsible, so when some time passed and Jessyka wasn't there, her boss tried to call her numerous times with no luck, and then her boss decided to try calling Jessyka's mother, Missy, just to see if she knew where Jessyka was. So her boss explained to Missy that Jessyka was 1 hour late to work, and Missy instantly had a really bad feeling that something was very wrong, because it was not like Jessyka to not show up to work. Working at First National was Jessyka's dream job, and her mother knew just how much she loved working there, and she knew she would never risk losing her job there. The people at the bank loved Jessyka. They got along really, really well, and not one bad word could be said about Jessyka at work at all. People just loved her. Missy was really unsettled with the fact that Jessyka was so late, and like most mothers, she had that intuitive pit in her stomach knowing something's wrong. However, she did not realize just how right her intuition was until she showed up to Jessyka's house. Missy starts to call Jessyka over and over, but there's no answer. And so as she's calling Jessyka, Missy gets into her car and she starts driving over to Jessyka's house. Missy's worried that Jessyka is maybe sick, or maybe she got into a car wreck. She really just could not think of any reason why Jessyka would be either so late or just not showing up. So when Missy got to the house, she saw Jessica's car in the driveway. Missy knew that Dominic, Jessica's son, had stayed with his father, John McDowell, the night before, which was about 25 minutes away. This meant that Jessica was home alone the night before. So when Missy tried to get into the house, the door was locked, but Missy had a key of her own and she let herself inside. The house was really dark and Missy could not see anything around her, but she knew the layout of the house and she knew that the bathroom was just off to her left and she could hear the water running in the bathroom, so that gave her, a little bit of hope, thinking, okay, Jessica's in there, either she's taking a shower or a bath, or maybe she's sick, but chances are she's in there because the water's running. So Missy opens up the door and she turns on the lights, and Jessica is in the bathtub with the water running, and the water level was up to Jessica's nose. She was curled up in a fetal position, and one hand was clutching a mobile phone charging cord. There was blood pooled under her head, and there was a ligature mark on her neck. Missy, of course, is in shock, and she starts screaming and she calls 911, and she's so distraught that 911 could not even understand what she was saying. But finally she's able to convey that she found her daughter in the tub, and she says that maybe she slipped and she doesn't know how long Jessica had been in the water. While waiting for rescue, Missy decides to drain the tub, thinking that somehow it would be helpful. But just by looking at Jessica, she could tell that draining the water was not going to help. She looked at her daughter and she just knew that Jessica was gone. Now in homicide, detectives get there. They do a walkthrough to get an idea of what happened. They see Jessica in the bathtub, and oddly, her clothes were in the bathtub with her, laying at her feet. They also notice that the couch in the living room has blood all over it, and at first they think that Jessica maybe had some sort of an accident on that couch, and that maybe she went into the bathroom to clean herself and then collapsed. Detectives did not see any obvious sign of trauma on Jessica other than a small bruise on the side of her neck. Now I know I just told you that Jessica's mother saw a ligature mark, but that really wasn't something that she saw. That's just something that they were able to see during autopsy. So as I said, they don't see any obvious signs of trauma on Jessica other than that small bruise on the side of her neck. But despite this, detectives felt that something was wrong and didn't look quite right. So they decided to treat Jessica's death as a homicide. The crime scene investigators arrived, and they used a laser scanner to take measurements, and they created a 3D virtual representation of Jessica's house. And then they took away Jessica's body. It was at that point, after actually looking at Jessica's eyes, when it became evident that there had been some sort of strangulation and or an asphyxiation, at the very least, that had taken place. one of the things that was noted right away was that Jessyka had longer fingernails, and one of those nails was bent back. Possibly, there would be a chance if Jessyka had fought back that there would be DNA under her fingernails. So the following day, the autopsy confirms that Jessyka had, for certain, been strangled to death. There were ligature marks around her neck that were consistent with the mobile phone cord. But the marks were disrupted, and it almost appeared as though that there was possibly a hand, most likely her hand, trying to pull. So the ligature marks were not just one long mark around her neck. There were several marks. You know, if you were to have, let's say, a rope or something around your neck, but you were able to get your hand under that rope and pull away, that rope is going to shift a bit, and when the rope makes contact against your skin again, that ligature mark is going to be in a different place. So that's what was going on with her neck. Jessyka also had hemorrhaging in her eyes, and there was also evidence that Jessyka had been sexually assaulted. She had a laceration and bruising in her vaginal area, as well as contusions to her head, abdomen, and bowel. Nobody knew of anybody who would want to harm Jessyka. She did not have any enemies. She was always sweet and kind to everybody. So initially, friends and family were more inclined to believe that it was just some random stranger who had attacked Jessyka. And then, of course, just like the natural progression of any investigation, detectives started looking into the men in Jessyka's life, the relationships that she had. That's when detectives heard from Jessyka's family members that Jessyka would call them as often as every other week because she got into another fight with John. Remember, that's Dominic's father, whom she was living with before she got her house. Another interesting fact was on the night that Jessyka was killed, she had made a Facebook post that could have put her in danger without realizing it. So she posted that she was home alone. And so what that post said was, quote, "I lost my remote to the Blu-ray player for like 15 minutes and thought my life was over. Seriously, I am such a mess when Dom is gone." End quote. Just so you guys are aware, I am going probably to be saying a lot of quote, end quote in this because there's just so much that was said that I don't think I could wrap up in a paraphrase and do the actual communication any justice. So with this information that Jessyka had posted on Facebook saying that Dominic wasn't with her, the detectives widened their investigation to include people who Jessyka was friends with on Facebook. The problem with that was narrowing down a person who may have had some sort of malicious intent. Trying to get a sense of who Jessyka was, her mother told detectives that both of her daughters were very smart, that Jessyka was outgoing and was always having fun. And then a friend of Jessyka's named Laura told detectives that Jessyka was nice to everybody and she just always wanted to have a good time. And also that Jessyka was kind of goofy, but in a good way, and she did what she wanted to do. Now, Laura, the friend who just said that about Jessyka, she and Jessyka were friends in school, but they drifted apart after high school, and their friendship was a bit unconventional and different in that both Jessyka and Laura had a child with John McDowell. And so how that worked out was that Laura was dating John first, but it was after she broke up with John that her son Christopher was born. Laura found out when she was 6 months pregnant with her son that John and Jessyka had just started dating, and Laura says that she really wanted to be mad at Jessyka, but she couldn't because Jessyka was just too nice of a person. And then pretty soon, John was no longer in the picture for either of them. And then, as single mothers, Laura and Jessyka reconnected so that their sons, who were half-brothers, could bond. With that, John, of course, became a person of interest, and he was asked to come to the police station to answer some questions. When John was asked about the last time he was at Jessyka's house, John answered that he could not be 100% sure, but he guessed that it was about 3 months prior. And when John was asked the last time he saw Jessyka, John said that it was the night before when Jessyka had dropped their son off at his house, which meant that John was the last known person to see Jessyka alive, other than the person who killed her, if it wasn't him. Detectives then brought in Jessyka's family members and friends to the station, and they asked all about John, and the impression wasn't very favorable. Detectives heard that even though Jessyka and John were just friends, that whenever Jessyka would post something on Facebook, most notably photos, John would always question her, especially if the photos had a man in the photo. And detectives also learned that Jessyka did not trust John, and she was filing for sole custody of Dominic because half the time when it was John's time to spend with Dominic, he refused. They had fights over Dominic, over custody, over money, and Jessyka was routinely upset with him. So after a few hours of questioning, detectives let John go, but warned him that he was their number one suspect, and they kept an eye on him as they investigated other men who had crossed paths with Jessyka. They were interested in any male person that Jessyka had recently been introduced to, anybody at all that could have been showing some interest in Jessyka, anybody communicating with her via social media or any other means that maybe seemed unwanted. Police learned that Jessyka's last hookup was with an old high school friend that had come back to town. He was a high school crush, and he was in the military, so when he was home on leave, Jessyka hung out with him for a few days, and then he was gone again. So detectives checked into his whereabouts the night Jessyka was killed, and he was nowhere around. And and he was ruled out pretty early on. Police had a hunch that whomever did this to Jessyka had to be someone she knew or trusted, maybe even somebody with a key to her home, and they felt that way because there was no forced entry, but the door was locked when Jessica's mother got there in the morning. Then Jessica's family told police about someone who had been violent toward Jessica's sister, Ashley, just a few days before the murder. Ashley was going through a divorce, and her ex-husband had threatened to kill her entire family and her just to get custody of their children. And the week before that, he had physically assaulted Ashley. He had pinned her on the floor, and he left bruises on her arm, and he had been arrested and was facing charges for domestic assault. Detectives checked out his alibi for the night of Jessica's murder, but they also went looking for anyone else who might have had access to Jessica's home, such as an ex who maybe was mad at her. But there wasn't anybody like that in her life. Everybody would tell detectives that Jessyka often referred to the only man in her life as Dominic, and her other man was her job. All Jessyka wanted to do was to concentrate on her work and providing a good life for Dominic. So it was 1 week later when the family held Jessica's funeral, and the family really expected kind of a small turnout for the funeral. However, it was anything but small. Jessica was adored. She was respected, and she was loved by so many people. Jessica I don't know, just from her Facebook, you can tell this girl was something special. And I'm not just saying that, I really believe this about her. I feel like if I knew her in real life, she would be one of those people that I would always feel protective of and love her just like everybody else did. I don't know if that sounds strange because I'm not really somebody who invites too many people into my life. I'm a very private person, but, you know, there are some people in your life, when you're close, you're close. So, at the funeral, some of the men that were there, they swore revenge, and they wore these Justice for Jessyka bracelets, including Jessica's brother, Matt, and her brother's best friend, who was also named Matt. So, let me just say that again so it's not confusing. So, Jessyka had a brother named Matt, and Matt's best friend was also named Matt. His name was Matt Kidder, and he had once lived with Jessica's family and knew Jessyka like a sister. He was with the family all throughout their grieving. He was somebody who would offer to do anything and everything for them, such as if people came by with food, Matt Kidder would be the first to be like, hey, can I help you with that? Let me put that on the table and help you with that. He offered to be a pallbearer in the funeral as well, but Harry, Jessica's father, told him that as much as he appreciated it, that they already had more than enough pallbearers, but he wanted to be one. And Jessica's parents, they had always treated Matthew Kidder as a son. Also at the funeral was John McDowell, Jessica's ex, the father of her son Dominic. Police go on with their investigation, and one of the first people they look into is John McDowell. But John's alibi checked out, so there was no way he was responsible. That's because police were able to look at his cell phone locations, and they were exactly where he said he was. So at no point did his phone ever put him anywhere near Jessica's house. So at this point, police are not really making any kind of headway. Jessica's sister's ex, the one who had been charged with assault, he had a solid alibi, so there was nothing there. So they went back and they started to follow up on something that one of Jessica's friends had told police about. This friend told police that sometimes Jessica had friends over for Saturday night get-togethers when Dominic was at his father's, and she said that the last one Jessica had, which was maybe 10 days before she was killed, had really bothered and unsettled Jessica. On that particular night, one of Jessica's friends invited her boyfriend to the get-together, and that friend's boyfriend invited some of his friends, and those friends invited other friends. As the night went on, there were more and more people showing up to Jessica's house that she did not know. That opened up the suspect pool quite a bit, especially after friends told one of the detectives that Jessica thought that something illegal was going on at her party. Apparently, some people were outside of the house, and there was some talk about an individual having pills if anybody wanted to buy them. And when Jessica heard that, she was really upset about it, and she told people to leave. Now, in hearing this, police try tracking down exactly who invited this guy with the pills to Jessica's house that night. But the answer complicated matters even more. Friends told detectives that the man who invited the drug dealer also tried at the party to initiate some kind of sexual encounter with Jessica by asking her if she wanted to stay in the bathroom with him after she asked for a towel. So basically what was going on there is she needed a towel for something, and there was somebody in the bathroom, and so she knocked on the door and asked for a towel, and that person in there asked her to stay there in the bathroom with him, and Jessica said no, and the guy tried to close the door to keep her in, but she was able to get the door open and leave. So that, of course, piqued the interest of the police, and they began to track this person down along with every male who went to the party. It took them several weeks to identify, locate, and interview these people and go through the same vetting process as far as getting a timeline and alibying them as everybody else. Police were also taking DNA samples from every single person they spoke to. At the same time, they asked one of their tech investigators to look for clues in Jessica's mobile phone. Jessica's phone was loaded with tons and tons of photos of her son, but there were also some very interesting text text messages as well. One of the last people Jessyka was communicating with was Matt Kidder. If you recall, Matt was the friend, more like a son, who had grieved with the Nelson family and was like a second brother to Jessyka. Jessyka and Matt had this easy kind of teasing sort of relationship. So of course they had texted each other, but the officer assigned to pull up those text messages did not know any of that when the text caught his attention. He felt that there was something eerie about them. The way that Matt was constantly asking Jessyka out to do stuff. He would text things like, "Hey, do you want to go bowling?" And Jessyka would text back, "You know what? I've got to clean up the house." And then he would text, "Oh well, can I come over and maybe help you clean up the house?" And then Jessyka replies with, "Oh, you know what? I'm almost done, so don't worry about it. Now I'm really tired, so I'm just going to bed." So texts like that were very frequent, and the sergeant in charge wanted to know who Matt Kidder was. He wanted more information about him. Jessyka's friends and family claimed that the back and forth banter between Jessyka and Matt was pretty typical, explaining that they were like a brother and sister bantering, that Matt would Matt would joke around with Jessyka and, she would just give it right back to him. But even so, detectives continued to dig a little bit more into this person that the entire Nelson family loved like their own. So he pulls up this string of text messages, and the text conversation began on February 4th, 2015. The first message was Matt asking Jessyka if he can come and shovel her driveway. For the next several months, Matt texted Jessyka, often suggesting that they meet up, and typically Jessyka either turned Matt down or sometimes she just did not even respond. 2 months later, in April, Matt texted saying that he needed some place to hang out while he waited to run an early morning errand. And so he asked if he could stop at Jessyka's house. And so Jessyka said that he could, but she told him that she would likely still be asleep and that she would leave the door unlocked. She told Matt that he could watch TV, nap on the couch, or use the chairs that were outside while he waited. So later, the text conversation occurred like this. So I'm going to be quoting these messages. So Matt says, "I'll admit, a little part of me wanted to run in and doggy pile you, but I didn't feel like being stabbed or beat up, LOL." Jessyka replies, "LOL, yeah, that def would have happened. I'm a grouch when my sleep is interrupted. Unless you're my son, then I'm less grouchy." Matt replies, "LOL, maybe next time." Jessyka replies, "If you want to die, I do keep a good-sized knife in my nightstand drawer." To which Matt replies, "Challenge accepted. We will need to lay down some ground rules though. No hair pulling, no biting, LOL." And Jessyka replies, "Or You could just leave me alone when I'm sleeping. Save us all the hassle. So that is the text messages back and forth that the detective read. Matt continued to text Jessyka regularly, and some of Matt's messages were sexual in nature. On June 19th, a few days before the murder, Matt sent Jessyka the following sequence of text messages. So, Matt says, on a scale of feeling playful, stabby to murdered in my sleep, yeah, trying to make a joke and now she's mad at me, LOL. I figured it would be funny breaking the ice joke since every other guy sends dick pics for their first or all communication, and I'm the one who asked the off-the-wall questions. So that was from Matt. Jessyka did not respond to these text messages, nor did she respond to the text message Matt sent several days later on the evening of June 24th asking, who's down to hang out or catch a movie Saturday night? In the interrogation room, Matt opens up to police, revealing that he feels guilty that he did not stop the person who had killed Jessyka. He said Jessyka had a really good heart, was a good mother, and a good friend. And then Matt opened up more and spoke about his brotherly, teasing sort of relationship with Jessyka. So he says, quote, me and Jess, we've always had a relationship where we have, like, inside sexual innuendo jokes, even though we never had an interest in each other like that. I've kind of always enjoyed that, being able to joke around with somebody, you know. We know it's never going to lead anywhere, so everything's on the table. End quote. Matt goes on further to say that he and Jessyka sometimes got physical in a playful way. He said, quote, we'd fool around a little bit, kind of like she'd pinch me, I'd poke her in the side. I mean, just like teasing, sibling teasing, I guess you could call it. Kind of like flirting, though I didn't consider it flirting, and as far as I know, she has never been interested in me. We were just friends. End quote. And after Jessyka was murdered, it was Matt who vowed to take revenge and told detectives that he felt guilty for failing to protect her, saying that he would do anything for his friends, that he would die for them if he had to. He said that he felt that he could have done something and maybe could have saved her if he had driven by that night, or if he had known somebody was attacking her. And so Matt is saying all this because Matt was at work that evening, very close by. So he said that he struggled with regret that he was so close and that maybe he could have saved her. So Matt says some more, and one of the things he says is, quote, I have an overactive imagination, or brain, or whatever you want to call it. Whoever did it must have been waiting to find her home alone, and must have seen her Facebook post, the one about her son, Dom, being away that night. That has to be a million shot to get there without Dom being there. Like, if they were watching her Facebook feed to go in, it's like somebody had to have been watching the house for a while to know that she was 100% alone there. End quote. Matt also claimed that it had to have been did this to Jessyka. And he said, quote, "I'm a fairly strong guy. I have weaknesses. My body's pretty fucked up. But she can kick my ass, so it just doesn't make sense that it was just one person," end quote. Matt told detectives that he had spent some time in prison, but it was for something he didn't do. It was for attempted sexual assault. He said that he was dating a married woman, and when he broke up with her, that she called the police and reported him for rape. But he says that this woman lied and it was a false accusation, and the Nelson family 100% supported him. They believed that Matt was railroaded, and Jessyka's mother had heard some not so very nice things about this woman, and she heard that this woman was always up to no good, so that further solidified their belief that Matt was innocent. After Matt got out of prison, the Nelsons celebrated with him and his family. Matt's father and Jessyka's father, Harry, they had been best friends for decades, just like he was best friends with Jessyka's brother. So after Jessyka's death, Matt provides a sample of his DNA and says that if they find any of his DNA in the house, it's normal because he's been to Jessyka's house many times in the past because they were so close. And though that makes some kind of sense, what he said next was very suspect, and I'm going to give you a straight quote here because I don't even know how to begin to paraphrase this. So Matt says, quote, "I pretty much bleed in everybody's house I go to because I get bored, and either I pick at a scab or cut myself on something," end quote. Yeah, so this guy says that everybody's house he goes to, he bleeds in it because he gets bored and he'll pick at a scab or cut himself on something. Very odd. So Matt insists that if the police are looking at him as a suspect, they have the wrong guy. He says that he would never be able to look the Nelsons in the eye if he had done this. He says he wouldn't be wearing Justice for Jessyka on his wrist, and he wouldn't be sharing her picture on Facebook looking for the fucking people who did this because he's not built that way. 3 weeks after Jessyka's death, Matt is talking to investigators again. This time around, they had more information than they had the last time Matt was being questioned. But they didn't tell Matt the evidence they had quite yet, and they allowed him to talk. They knew that Matt checked Facebook the night Jessyka was killed, and he would have seen that post that revealed that Jessyka was home alone. 3 weeks after Jessyka's death, Matt is talking to investigators again, only this time around they had more information than they had the last time Matt was being questioned. But they didn't tell Matt the evidence they had quite yet, and they allowed him to talk. They knew that Matt checked Facebook the night Jessyka was killed, and he would have seen the post that Jessyka said about being home alone. Using historical mobile site location information, detectives determined that Matt's mobile phone used a cell tower in the area near Jessyka's house at 11:56 p.m. on June 24th, 2015, and again at 12:02 a.m. on June 25th. Almost 30 minutes later at 12:29 a.m., Matt's mobile phone used cell towers in the vicinity of his own residence. The detectives had noticed a crescent-shaped cut on Matt's hand the first time around when he was being questioned. It appeared to be from Jessyka's thumbnail bending back as she defended herself. Matt's DNA was found under that nail, and his DNA was also found on the cord that she was strangled with. Now remember, Matt had no idea that detectives had this evidence against him yet, and Matt talked a lot. He told the detective, quote, "I kinda classify women into like 3 stages. Ones I could be friends with, ones I just want to see naked, and ones I want to sleep with. Jessyka was kinda in between. I want to see her naked and no feelings, just because she had a nice rack. She had nice boobs." End quote. Matt repeatedly denied being at Jessyka's house on June 24th, the night of the murder, but he told police that he was at her house on June 23rd to help her move furniture, and he made a point of mentioning that he had sweated heavily on Jessyka's couch and her mattress. The detective tells Matt that he believes Matt had something to do with it, and that did not go over so well, and Matt exploded. He said, quote, "I did not kill her. I don't know who did it. I wasn't fucking there that night. I wouldn't be able to watch my Uncle Harry basically collapse over the body of his daughter at the funeral if I had done this. Somebody murdered my friend, and here you are trying to accuse me of it. If you arrest me for something I didn't do, especially on this, it's going to destroy her family." End quote. But none of Matt's denials mattered at this point, because police believed that they had the right guy, and at the end of the interview, Matt was arrested for Jessyka's murder. Then it was time to tell the Nelson family, and when they told them that they had arrested Matt, of course Missy and Harry were in shock. They just could not believe that this person who they treated and thought of as family, as another son to them, could possibly have hurt Jessyka. Missy and Harry now had the unenviable task of now breaking the news to the rest of the family, and how they did that was they gathered everybody together, and then Harry told them to take a look around them and to take note of the one person who probably would be there but wasn't. And that's when they knew. Up until that very moment, Matt Kidder had been Matt Nelson's best friend in the world. They were just as close as brothers, and Matt Nelson trusted him implicitly. Now, while Matt was in jail, he calls his father, and of course, that call was recorded, and during the call, Matt admits that he was at Jessyka's house for about 20 minutes on the night she was killed. So Matt says to his father, quote, "I think Jessyka fell asleep on the couch after I left, and somebody came in behind," end quote. So his So now the story changed from all of these times that he denied being in the house, very adamantly denying that he was even there. But that wasn't it. There was more. While Matt was in jail, Matt shared a cell with another inmate. His name is Randy Anderson, and he shared this cell with Randy for approximately 20 hours. Afterward, Randy contacted police and he offered to testify about statements that Matt made to him while they were cellmates. When Randy contacted the police, he was awaiting sentencing on plea-based convictions for burglary and making terrorist threats. At trial, Randy testified that Matt told him that on June 24th, 2015, Matt saw Jessyka's Facebook post about being home alone. After getting off work around midnight, Matt went to Jessyka's home and knocked on the side door, and Jessyka unlocked the chain on the door and let him in. Almost immediately, Matt somehow caused an injury to Jessyka's face and she screamed, and Matt began strangling her with his hands. As they struggled, Jessyka cut Matt's hand with her fingernail. Eventually, Jessyka lost consciousness. Matt then took her to the bedroom and removed her sweatpants. Matt did not directly admit that he sexually assaulted Jessyka, but he did admit that he strangled her to death with a mobile phone cord, then placed her in the bathtub and ran the water to rinse away DNA. Randy also knew several details about the crime and the crime scene before they became public knowledge. For example, Randy knew that after the murder, Matt washed his shoes and stuffed them with newspaper to dry them. He also knew that Jessyka had a chain lock on her door. He also knew that Jessyka was in the fetal position in the bathtub. And he also knew that Jessyka had an L-shaped sectional couch that was cut during the assault. And lastly, he knew that Jessyka was wearing sweatpants the night she was killed. So this informant gave police a view into what Jessyka went through. For Matt, it was about power, control, and being rejected by Jessyka via text that made him angry. There was a question of, did Matt do this because he's an angry person and could not handle the rejection, or was there more to it? Does Matt, in a weird way, get off on being rejected? And the more he's rejected, the more he needs to have that power and control, and that's just part of the build-up. Which brings us back to the woman who accused Matt of rape. Her name is Patricia, and I'm not really comfortable sharing her last name, so I'm not going to do that. So remember, Matt went to prison for attempted first-degree sexual assault, but he had convinced Jessyka's family that it was all a lie. Patricia's experience with Matt was not unlike the Nelsons. Matt had insinuated his way into the Nelson family, and none of them thought that Matt would ever do anything to harm them. So Matt was a new friend to Patricia's family. Patricia met him through her oldest daughter, and Patricia's husband taught Matt how to drive his truck, and they too would do things for Matt that any family who had a teenaged boy would do. In 2008, Matt had gone to Patricia's house, claiming to be locked out of his house, and she let him in. And after a few minutes of talking, Matt grabbed Patricia and threw her to the ground. He got on top of her, and he placed his hands on her neck. Patricia began to scream, so Matt moved his hands to her mouth and nose, closing her airways. She briefly shoved his hands off and she screamed, "No." But Matt's hands returned over her face and his grip got tighter. Eventually, she shoved Matt's hands off again, but this time she told him, "Okay." Matt then sexually assaulted Patricia and then left. Matt subsequently entered a plea of no contest to a charge of attempted first-degree sexual assault. Now, to this day, Patricia believes that had she not said okay, that he would have killed her. But there's even more evidence that comes into play as well. After Matt was arrested, police obtained a warrant to search Matt's home, and one of the items seized pursuant to the warrant was a laptop computer that was found in Matt's bedroom. A few days later, police get a second search warrant authorizing an examination of Matt's laptop to search and copy the user account information, media files such as images and videos, document files, internet browsing history and associated cache files, email messages, and chat and instant messages. While searching Matt's internet browsing history, a forensic analyst found that Matt's laptop computer was used to search an internet pornography website using terms like strangled, force fucked, fucked by intruder, and pantyhose bound. Because the searches were conducted while the laptop was in private browsing mode, the available history was limited. But the forensic analyst was able to determine that the website was accessed between June 20th and July 17th, 2015. The analyst also determined that a video titled "Psycho Thrillers Presents Waitress Kidnapped, Raped, and Strangled" had been downloaded on July 17th. That video depicted a man kidnapping a waitress, forcing her to have sex at gunpoint, strangling her with a belt when she resisted, and continuing to sexually assault her after she was dead. 3 other videos with similar content were also found on Matt's laptop. Matt did not testify, but his defense said that all the evidence, DNA, mobile phone tracking, the cellmate's story, all had innocent explanations, and they said that he wasn't the killer, plain and simple. But the jury deliberated 41 minutes before convicting Matt Kidder of Jessyka's murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Now, the aftermath. If you're wondering what happened to Dominic, Jessyka's son, Dominic now lives with his father, John, and Laura, who was Jessyka's friend, who also has a son, Dominic's half-brother. She was spending so much time over at John's house, helping out Dominic and John, that it just became the natural progression of things. They ended up together and they live as a family unit. And as tragic and awful as Jessyka's death is, Dominic is very, very loved, and he often says, I got a mommy in heaven, and I've got a mom here.